Paris after closing time on the 27th of April 1901. The American Express office on Rue Scribe stood beside the Opera, a polished address for travelers, money orders, and mail. Somewhere inside, a night watchman was overpowered, and charges were set against the safes. May Duignan later said she had entered as a customer, hidden beneath a counter, and opened a door for Eddie Guerin and his companions. That detail comes from her decades later. The broken safes and the convictions are public record. The size of the haul is not. Published accounts range from a few $1,000s to a fortune. How could one of the era's most reported criminals leave such an unstable record? The answer begins with the name she made for herself, Chicago May, and with the difference between a court file and a story told by its subject. Civil and biographical research places her birth in late December 1871 in Edenmore, County Longford. Her name was Mary Ann Duignan, and her family occupied a respectable farm. At 18 in June 1890, she took about 60 pounds from the family savings and left for the United States. Her own memoir supplied a different beginning. There she called herself Beatrice Desmond, moved her birth to 1876, and dated her flight to 1889. She also described a youthful marriage to a Western outlaw called Dal Churchill, a union historians have been unable to document. These are not small slips of memory. They change her age, identity, and route into crime. Before Chicago May became a newspaper character, Mary Ann Duignan had already learned to control the account of who she was. By the early 1890s, Duignan was in Chicago. The city was preparing for the World's Columbian Exposition, and the arrival of workers and visitors created an unusually rich field for theft and confidence schemes. Later research places her there from roughly 1891 to 1894. Her own account called the district around the levee a school, a place where she learned pickpocketing, hotel theft, and extortion from other offenders. The language is hers, and some of its personalities cannot be checked. The broader pattern can. Chicago was where her nickname took hold, and where a young Irish immigrant became a portable reputation. She would carry that city name through New York, London, and Paris long after Chicago itself had ceased to be her base. In New York, the record becomes less romantic and more legible. Between late 1896 and early 1899, she faced repeated grand larceny charges, and each case ended without a conviction. Contemporary descriptions linked her to the Badger game, in which a compromising encounter was converted into a demand for money. Letters, photographs, an invented husband, or a waiting accomplice could turn privacy into leverage. In 1899, she married James Montgomery Sharp. The marriage was brief, but his surname remained useful, joining Churchill and May among the identities she used. The pattern was consistent. She moved between hotels, theaters, and nightlife, targeted men reluctant to testify, and treated social shame as a form of security. Her best protection was often the victim's wish to remain absent from the public record. A police crackdown helped send Duignan to London in 1900. There she met Eddie Guerin, an experienced burglar whose surviving Pinkerton photograph shows a guarded face under a bowler hat. By the spring of 1901, they were partners. Their target in Paris was the American Express office on Rue Scribe, near the Opera. The company had moved into the prominent address as international travel expanded around the Paris Exposition. It handled mail, money orders, traveler's checks, and shipping for Americans abroad. The location offered money, but also visibility. Duignan, Guerin, and two accomplices planned an entry after business hours. Whatever later retellings added, the operation was not a chance theft. It required surveillance, access to the premises, and the equipment to force a safe. Duignan's memoir gives the most detailed version of the entry. She said she distracted clerks near closing, concealed herself beneath a counter, then unbolted a door after the office emptied. Guerin and the others restrained the watchmen, drilled the safes, and used explosive charges. She moved outside as lookout and directed an investigating gendarme away from the sound. Later newspaper accounts support the binding of the watchmen and the use of explosives, but they do not settle every movement she described, nor do they settle the proceeds. One report put the take at only tens of thousands of francs. Other accounts raised it to tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. The safe was real, the burglary was real, and the numerical precision is not. Guerin was apprehended while trying to leave France. Duignan reached London, but then returned to Paris in an effort to assist him and was arrested. In 1902, the French proceedings ended with severe sentences. Guerin and the accomplice known as Dutch Gus received transportation for life. Duignan received 5 years for her part in handling the robbery's proceeds. She spent time at Saint-Lazare, Fresnes, Clermont, and Montpellier. Her memoir says she served 2 years and 9 months before a medical pardon. Later research gives roughly 2 years and 10 months. The difference is minor beside the central fact. The woman who had relied on other people's silence was convicted in a case that crossed borders, police forces, and languages. For the first time, a court judgment became stronger than her chosen name. Guerin was transported to the French penal colony in Guyana. Popular accounts call it Devil's Island, but the surviving record places his escape from the mainland settlement, not from the island itself. Around 1905, he got away and eventually reached the United States, then Britain. Duignan later claimed that she and criminal associates had raised a large fund to bribe officials and support the escape. That claim cannot be established from the public record, and Guerin told competing versions. What can be said is narrower. He escaped, he returned, and his former partner was again in his path. Their reunion collapsed into accusation. Guerin believed she had betrayed him after the Paris case. Duignan denied it. Each later wrote a memoir, and each used the other as an explanation for disaster. In April 1906, British police arrested Guerin while France sought his return. He spent more than a year in Brixton prison fighting extradition. The dispute turned on nationality and on whether France could lawfully recover him. May's role in locating him was contested at the time and remains so. Later biographical research concludes that she informed the police. Her memoir insists that French authorities prompted the search and that she was falsely branded an informer. The legal result is clearer than the betrayal story. The extradition request failed, and Guerin walked free on the 14th of June, 1907. By then, Duignan was living with another criminal, Charlie Smith. Guerin had reportedly made threats against her, while Smith had promised protection. One day after Guerin's release, the conflict moved into a London street. Near midnight on the 15th of June, 1907, Duignan and Smith were riding through Bloomsbury in a cab. They saw Guerin near Russell Square Underground Station. Smith got out and fired 6 shots. Guerin was struck in the foot. A constable intervened, and both Smith and Duignan were arrested. Her later account framed the encounter as self-defense, claiming Guerin also drew a pistol and that his weapon jammed. The prosecution treated the cab ride, the weapon and her presence, as evidence of a planned attack. The wound was not fatal, but the charge was attempted murder. This is the point where many retellings become a romance of jealousy or revenge. The court record is more restrained. A man was shot, 2 defendants were taken into custody, and motive would not decide the sentence by itself. The case was tried at the Old Bailey on the 25th of July, 1907 before Justice Darling. The hearing lasted 1 day. Guerin testified, the defendants' criminal histories entered the story, and the jury convicted. Smith received penal servitude for life. Duignan received 15 years for attempted murder and was sent to Aylesbury Prison. She would later argue that the judge punished her reputation more than the act itself. The sentence nevertheless stands in the public record, as does the fact that she served about 10 years. At Aylesbury, she lived under the name attached to the conviction, not the one she preferred in print. The international confidence woman, practiced in moving before witnesses could assemble, had finally reached a system designed to keep its subject in one place. In March 1917, after nearly a decade at Aylesbury, Duignan was released in poor health and deported to the United States. Her marriage to Sharp had made her an American citizen for immigration purposes. She arrived during the First World War and passed through Ellis Island before returning to New York. Attempts at ordinary employment did not last. Police and court records again placed her around theft, prostitution, and disorderly conduct, first in New York and later in Detroit. The sums were smaller, the travel less grand, and her health increasingly uncertain. The contrast matters. Newspaper legend preserved a woman crossing oceans with jewels and aliases. The later record shows repeated arrests, probation, and hospital treatment. Her criminal career did not end with a final clever escape. It narrowed. In 1926, Duignan underwent treatment while in custody in Detroit. There she met August Vollmer, the Berkeley police chief and influential advocate of professional policing. Vollmer encouraged her to earn money by writing about the life she had already sold to newspapers in fragments. 5 illustrated articles appeared in the New York American Weekly in July and August 1927. The series presented Chicago May as a famous offender explaining why crime did not pay. It was both confession and commercial product. In 1928, the Macaulay Company published Chicago May, her story under the name May Churchill Sharp, with a foreword by Philadelphia lawyer Henry John Nelson. Nelson said the account had been dictated to his stenographer. The book gave Duignan what courts had denied her, control of the final wording. The control did not last. On the 30th of May 1929, Mary Ann Duignan died in a Philadelphia hospital after surgery. She was about 57, not 52 as newspapers repeated from the age she had chosen. She was buried in an unmarked grave at Fernwood Cemetery. Her memoir remained along with court reports, police descriptions, later biographies, and contradictory totals for the Scribe safe. returned to that office after closing in 1901. The watchmen, the explosives, the arrests, and the sentences survive scrutiny. The hidden counter, the exact proceeds, and the motives depend on narrators with interests of their own. Chicago May's final scheme was not an acquittal. It was an attempt to become the author of the evidence. The public record survived beside her book, incomplete, less colorful, and harder to move.